Welcome to Season 3 of the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, Wealth Advisor at Moxie Wealth Management. Today on the show, we chat with Todd Hall, former Executive Vice President at the Cargill Corporation. Todd talks about how to effectively create a culture at a large organization, his feelings about ego as it relates to leadership, and the experience of starting a performance review by telling someone he just doesn't trust them. Todd, welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Just to get it started for our listeners so they can get an idea of scale, prior to your retirement, you were at Cargill. And Cargill, just so people can get an idea of how large that organization is, there's 166,000 employees worldwide in 66 countries anyways, at least according to the internet, that's what I have. Supplying 22% of the meat for the entire United States and is responsible for 25% of the grain exports. And if it were public, it'd be the number 15 company on the Fortune 500. And one other quirky little thing I found is that all the eggs that McDonald's has pass through Cargill at some point in time in their plants.
That's the eggs in the U.S., but yeah.
Eggs in the U.S., got it. I'm not sure if there's a rank if it's the number one food producer in the U.S., but there's $114 billion of sales, I believe, last year, and that would have been 2018. And then Bunge, I think, that's the right pronunciation, right?
Mm-hmm, Bunge.
They're number two, and they're at $42 billion of sales in a reference. And rather than 166,000 employees, they have 31,000 employees, but they'd be number two in the U.S. That's their space. So, massive company.
Yeah.
In your role, you'd retired in the first quarter of 2019. At that time, you were Executive VP of the organization.
That's correct.
Enterprise leader for protein and salt. And I think in protein and salt, that would be of that $114 billion. What are we talking? 30% of that?
Yep, about 30% of it.
About 30%. Member of the corporate leadership team. I don't know if that's required as a separate deal, but that's the top 8 or 9 in the organization.
Yeah, it was called the Enterprise team.
Enterprise team.
Enterprise leadership team.
Okay. You are also a member of the board of directors at Cargill, which is made up of 6 former CEOs, 6 family members, and that's the McMillan family, right?
McMillan Cargill family.
McMillan and Cargill, got it. And then 5 management directors, and you were one of the 5.
Yeah, up to 5. At the time I was there, we had 4 of us on the board.
You had a fairly important role at that organization.
Yeah, you're scaring me.
So when you were growing up, would you consider yourself a leader? I mean, were you the guy that was student council or sports or anything like that?
No. You know, it's funny. I don't think I was ever elected to a leadership position when I was growing up. The first time I remember being interested in leadership was actually at college, or the fraternity I was in, Beta Theta Pi. Mm-hmm. As a sophomore, I ran for the vice president, which was part of the executive committee. And that was sort of when I thought, I think I have leadership qualities that, ought to be experienced more by me, or at least see how far they go.
Right after you graduated then, was Cargill the first organization you worked at?
It was, yeah.
It was?
Yeah.
What drew you to Cargill at the time?
A job offer. No, that's not true. I had 3 offers coming out of college, and it's a funny story. Lori, my wife, I went home. She had actually graduated at mid-year in December, and I accepted the job in the spring of '82. So she wasn't at college, but I had gone to see her that weekend, and she thought I was going to take a job with Hormel in meat sales. Great Minnesota company, and probably would have had a wonderful career there. And, it was more money. It was a car. There was an expense account. It was a sales job. And, there was something really special about Cargill and the people that I met there when I interviewed. The age, especially in the division I interviewed with, the age of the management team was very young. And I can remember thinking, a young management team and a vision for growth. Dave Larson, who was a vice president of the feed business at the time, always talked about becoming the biggest and best and, doubling our size and things like that. And I thought, okay, so young leadership team and that kind of exponential growth, chances are there's going to be a lot of opportunity there if I work hard and do well.
Got it.
And proved out.
Obviously, Cargill is all over the world, but what city are you in to begin with?
Well, my first assignment was in Minneapolis in a training program. So at that time, Cargill had an orientation program, and I did 3 weeks of orientation and then 2 weeks of what was called merchant training. So I was there for 5 weeks, expecting then at the end of this 5 weeks to be assigned to a training location within animal nutrition. I started with 8 people, and 7 of them got assigned outside of Minneapolis, and I got assigned to a role in Minneapolis, which immediately shot my confidence and hurt my ego. And I thought, they didn't think I was good enough to even waste time on sending out to a training location.
Moving to Minnesota, then you didn't have any relatives or?
No, but it's not far. I mean, it's it's a couple hundred miles from Des Moines, so it was an easy drive. So it was a nice start adjustment for what would come for her, because she'd lived in Des Moines her whole life, and her both sets of grandparents and family was all from Des Moines. So moving her anywhere was going to be a bit of a shock for her family.
My experience in knowing people at Cargill is that you tend to kind of know a path, or at least know where you are. How long were you in that initial role before things started to pick up steam for you a little? Yeah,
so I told you, I got assigned to Minneapolis, and I was I was reporting to what was called a division accounting manager, and I thought, oh, geez, this isn't what I signed up for. I wanted to be an admin manager at the time. Now they call them business managers, and responsible for trading the ingredients that we would use in the feed mills and things like that. Well, I get assigned to the accounting manager, and I'm doing these special projects, and I'm watching everybody I started with out there getting the hands-on experience and learning, and I'm thinking that, they're just getting ahead of me here because I'm not learning that stuff.
Yeah.
And that lasted until it was about Halloween that year, and I finally got assigned to McPherson, Kansas, a whopping town of 8,000 people, and where we went to Wichita, Kansas for things to do. A small town in the middle of Kansas.
And what does your wife say on that first move?
Where is McPherson, Kansas?
Yeah, right. Does she kind of say, all right, what's the plan at this organization?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, she by then I had gotten married in August, and she knew what was coming. I mean, she knew that moves were part of the deal, and we were going to go somewhere for training. I think she was pretty good and pretty ready for it when the time came to go to McPherson, Kansas.
And speaking of moving, I think that's just part of the development, of course, at Cargill. You moved quite a few times.
Yeah, I like to say 9 times in the first 13 years with Cargill. So between 1982 and 1995, we moved 9 times and had 3 kids. And every time we had a child, we moved too. So during Lori's pregnancy.
So is there a time where you say to Cargill, all right, I've got a second grader now, and I would like to get them settled into school. Is there a window of moving, or is that just something that you feel is, or at least as part of the organization, you just kind of need to be comfortable moving? Or how does that work?
First of all, it's changed over the years, and much more so now than it was 30, 40 years ago with dual income families and things like that you have to think about, trailing spouses' careers and things. So I think Cargill's done a wonderful job with figuring it out, how to work remotely and telecommute and things like that. But it still does require moves. Your question was around, was there a time where I kind of could take a stand, right?
Yeah, where you just kind of said, I don't want to move anymore. What happens?
Yeah, So fortunately, I never had to have that specific conversation with anyone, because I after we came back to Minneapolis in '95, shortly thereafter, I became a member of the leadership team of animal nutrition, and at that point, starting a path towards becoming a corporate leader. And those jobs, a lot of those jobs are in Minneapolis, so it was pretty easy. However, there became a point at which our boys were well ingrained in Maple Grove Junior High and high school and doing extremely well. And, Lori and I had talks about this would be a really difficult time to accept a move somewhere.
Bad time to do it.
Yeah, bad timing. So, but fortunately, I never had to make that decision.
Well, and let me take a step back just for the benefit of people to get a better understanding of Cargill. You were involved with animal nutrition, and animal nutrition is one of how many business units at Cargill?
So Cargill's gone through, like any other major company,
Yeah.
lots and lots of reorganizations. At the time I was in animal nutrition, and the time we're talking about here in say 95 to the late 90s, there were approximately 100 business units within
Right.
Cargill, of which animal nutrition was one of those business units.
Okay.
It was one of the largest business units within Cargill at that time because it was a global business, and lots of the business units in Cargill were local or regional, geographically regional businesses.
And you also mentioned, so you were on a leadership team within animal nutrition, and then corporate leader then would be the level of executives or management above all the business units. Was that the right way to say it?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a corporate leadership team. There was a corporate center, of which the president of animal nutrition at the time that I reported to would have been a member of that corporate center.
Got it.
Corporate center in the CLT at the time would have been considered the corporate leadership team. There were probably 30 in that group at that time.
Got it. One thing that we didn't cover, because I've known a lot of people at Cargill, if you want to keep going in the corporate leadership space, most of the time you have to live abroad.
Yeah, that's right.
And that wasn't exactly true in your case.
No, it wasn't. It was a well-known fact within Cargill that if you wanted to become part of the corporate leadership team, your chances were greatly improved if you had lived and worked internationally, overseas somewhere. Being a global organization, obviously, they were looking for managers and eventually leaders of the corporate leadership team, who understood cultures and people and businesses around the world.
And that was never presented as a choice for you, or did you have a choice and chose not to?
It's funny. It's funny. I was probably 7 or 8 years with the company at the time, and I replaced a guy who had been a boss of mine previously who had moved to Korea. Our PMP forms at the time, or our annual review forms at the time, had this little box at the back where you checked, and it said, "Are you willing to relocate? Yes or no? International? Yes or no?" And so, every year you check these boxes. Well, for the first 6 or 7 years, I just automatically checked yes and yes.
Oh,
right?
okay.
And then I replaced this guy who went to Korea. It was like, Korea? So then it was, are you willing to relocate? Yes. International? No. And because I figured if somebody really wanted me to go international, then they would have a talk with me. And,
Sure.
They wouldn't be able to use, well, you checked yes.
Yeah, right.
Let's have a discussion about this now.
Exactly. And so, we've talked about these different levels. When you started out at Cargill, did you have an end game of someday I'm going to be CEO of this organization and I'm going to rule the world or whatever? You know what I mean? Like, did you have I want to go as high as I can, or what was your perspective on that?
I had a goal, but it wasn't to be CEO or even the position that I ended up, as executive vice president. When I took the job with Cargill out of college, it was a training program. It was a general management training program, and the general manager of our local businesses in animal nutrition would have been called a district general manager. So they ran a region within this division.
How far up would that have been from your first job?
3 or 4
jobs, okay.
Probably.
Got it. Okay.
Depending on, do you zigzag or go straight up?
Yeah.
But probably 3 or 4 jobs. So I was an administrative management trainee. The administrative manager would have been the position that I would have gotten after my training. And that administrative manager reported to the general manager of the business.
Oh, okay.
General manager was responsible for sales and production and the administration, so the billing and the collecting and all that kind of thing. So it was literally like you ran this business. You planned the strategy, the budget, you executed against those. That's what I wanted. That was my goal to achieve. And that was, by the time I ended at Cargill, that was like 5 to 6 jobs below where I ended up at. And so everyone after that was like, I used to say everyone after that is like gravy. But the reality was everyone after that was, okay, I'll do it. But I really like running the business.
Got it. Well, and sometimes the best person for a leadership position doesn't want the position.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So this belief was formed over, 15 or 20 years of watching others and then my own situation and discussions with a boss at the time who was also a mentor and a sponsor and a coach, Richard Frosch, who had a great impact on me and my career. But he started talking with me probably a year before I became president of the animal nutrition business about, you need to be thinking about this, and you're the person I want, and gave me opportunities, projects to work on, and things like that. It never got with me to the point where I have to have this job. If anything, it was more of the feeling of responsibility to the people in the business. He was able to convince me that the people in the business would be better served if I took the job. And it was like, okay, but what if I really don't want it?
Right.
And that's easy for me to say now. There was also a part of, my ego that would have been, had I not been offered it, I would have been really disappointed too.
Right.
But that's just the competitive nature within me. But because there's an awful lot of responsibility to families of employees of the organization that you're leading, that any leader leads, that, you should wake up every day thinking about, my job is to be sure that this business thrives, and that way the people and their families within the business will thrive.
Well, so for example, if you're president of the animal nutrition business unit, and theoretically, if that business doesn't thrive, you're having to lay off people in your organization.
Yeah, and which is going to affect families. And maybe the difference between a child of an employee or a former employee being able to go to college or not, and things like that. So I always viewed it as you need to be careful about what you ask for or what you want, because the responsibility is more than just thinking about sales and costs and business, but you got to think about the development and the future of the people within the business.
In a number of podcasts that I've talked to different leaders of organizations, there's a concept, the imposter syndrome concept. You keep ascending to these different levels, and at some point in time, somebody's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, yeah, the jig is up. I know you're not actually that great at this, and
you're a fraud.
Yeah, you're a fraud. Time for you to go, right? And there are people trying to sort through that, but there's also the other side of not the imposter syndrome, but being too egotistical, which I think it's a different take. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I worked really hard to rid those people from the organization, or rid the organization from those people. Maybe is the right way to say it.
From ego,
yeah,
folks.
So fortunately, I talked about Richard Frosch, my mentor. He was one of the first people to kind of point this out to me. He said, usually the people who really want the job, who want it really badly, they're not the best people for the job because they want it for the wrong reason. It's the people who, feel the awesome sense of responsibility that they now have on their shoulders, and the team they're leading and everything else, that you want running it, because they're the ones that are going to give it the most care and concern and study and work night and day to be sure that it's a success or that it grows for all the right reasons. The people who want it really bad are typically, and this is my opinion, typically the people who want it for all the wrong reasons. They want it because it means a bigger salary or a bigger bonus or more stock options or whatever that brings to them personally. And people like that have trouble attracting and retaining the best talent, because eventually the best talent figures them out.
Yeah.
Figures them out and goes, wow, I don't want to work for that egotistical
Right.
fill in the blank.
Yeah, got to be the smartest person in the room all the time, right? So did you feel a sense of a duty if you keep getting promoted, that it was maybe your responsibility as a good member of the organization to keep taking those? Or were there times where you said, nope, I'm done now, don't want to take, you know what I mean? Or do you kind of just feel like, well, if I'm doing what I'm supposed to and I feel like I'm qualified for the position, that as I keep getting promoted, I should probably do it because maybe I'm the best person to do it? Or how did you feel that?
So the funny thing is, you said I feel like I'm qualified for the position. I never moved into a new role where I felt I was qualified for it at the time I rolled into it, ever.
Huh.
May go back to the imposter syndrome that you were talking about earlier. Yeah, I always felt that there were equally good, if not better, candidates, that there were a lot of things that I didn't know and didn't understand about the role or the business that I was being asked to take over. So I never went into it with, I'm overly qualified for this. I got this. This is nailed.
Did you have mentors that guided you along that said, yeah, you shouldn't feel that good or whatever? You know what I mean? Like kind of, it's part of the process, or whatever.
The best, the coolest thing about the mentors that I had was they were really in tune to me personally. And so if they ever felt that I was a little too cocky, arrogant, maybe pushing ready, if they thought I was like, okay, he's obviously getting far too comfortable, they would point out the fact that there was lots of stuff I didn't know.
Got it.
This isn't quite as easy as you think it is. If they felt that my confidence wasn't there, so hey, I'm not sure I want this role, this position, this responsibility, then they would go the other way. And they'd fill in the blank about why I should be doing something or why I should take the role or why I am the best person for the job. And so it was a really, really good combination of mentorship and I would say a combination of mentorship and sponsorship within this individual.
Speaking of sponsorship, I'd like to remind our listeners that this podcast is brought to you by Moxie Wealth Management. You can find out more about our firm at moxiewealthmanagement.com. Now, back to our discussion. You found yourself in a mentorship role as things evolved, and I happen to know a couple of the people personally who you have mentored, and they can't say enough good things about you.
That's kind.
I don't know the right question to ask, but I'm thinking, how do you think you had the greatest effect when you were trying to mentor somebody?
Well, first of all, this may sound bad, but I would never mentor someone that I didn't believe had a world of potential. It got to the point where my time was so limited that I just couldn't mentor everyone.
Right.
And so I typically mentored people who I thought, this person has a tremendous amount of potential. They could lead and fill in the blank. They could lead the law department. They could be CFO. They could potentially be CEO someday. They just have that skill set. They were a servant type of a leader. Were typically the type of people that I would take on and mentor. So I would never limit myself to a certain number, but if after a short while of working around or near or with someone, I discovered that they were more self-centered than they were others-oriented, and I would just stop, scheduling the meetings, and it would end.
And how hard is it? It sounds like through the idea of maybe who you mentored or who you might place in different positions, is that your most effective way of affecting the culture in an organization that's as large as it is? Because it would seem like a big ship to move.
Yeah.
So
I've always been a big believer on culture, I think. And my definition of culture is values and beliefs practiced. So I was big on values. The businesses I ran, we always had a set of 4 core values, which were integrity, respect for others, commitment to serve, and passion for success. It could be passion for excellence or passion for success, depending on languages and what transpired. And we talked about those all the time. And then this commitment to serve was the others orientation that I was looking for. So is your commitment to serve others and grow this business and do the best for other people, whether those are customers or employees, or is this all about you? And that was the key. But back to your question, so if you never took a position that you thought you were ready for, you better surround yourself with the very best people, right? And so, the answer to your question is I think the way for leaders to be effective and the most important decisions they have to make are who they choose to put on their team and who they choose to promote and move into certain positions. So the most care I gave for any of the decisions I ever made were about people.
Did you ever have a moment where you said, whoops? That's not the right person.
Unfortunately, lots of them. But those were learning opportunities too, right? They were. I'm a believer that if you've never failed, then you've never really learned.
Right.
And so, though some of my biggest failures around people maybe made me cautious on others, but I think they made me more aware of people and motives and what they did and why they did things.
I haven't had to manage a large number of people at once, but when you're communicating to people who are not the right fit, are you communicating that I think the values part is not in alignment, or at least this is what I see, or you're not that direct when you're communicating to people?
No, I have been that direct before. I had a mid-year review with a manager that reported to me once where I simply said, actually, I had written on a piece of paper and I pushed it across the table and I said, "You need to read this." And it said, "I don't trust you."
Wow.
That was the extent of the mid-year review, of what I wrote on the mid-year review. And then we had a 2-hour conversation about why I didn't trust him. And so to me, that's a value. It was all wrapped up in all of those values.
I know it wouldn't sound right at the time for that employee, but they probably appreciate having a mirror held up, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you don't trust that person, pretty soon that's going to spread in an organization, right?
Exactly, and that was the reason I had that. If I didn't care about the success or that person making it, I wouldn't have wasted my time to have that review, right? That's a kind of an expensive way to have it, right? There's a lot of potential ramifications for a boss telling an employee they don't trust them.
Right.
I was confident that it would lead to the discussion that I wanted it to, which is, so why? Well, these are the behaviors I observe in you. These are the things I've seen you do. And for me, real trust is built not around what I see someone does, but the reason why they're doing it. So if you see someone who, I'm going to make this up right now, but let's say they run and get their boss coffee every morning, right? And they bring it in, "Boss, here's your cup of coffee."
Right.
Okay? I'm a skeptical person. I jump right to, God, they're a brown noser, right? They're trying to be sure the boss notices them and gets their attention, and maybe they're really not all that good. Well, I've drawn that conclusion. So I went from the behavior I witnessed to drew a conclusion. Typically, the conclusion someone draws about a behavior they see is wrong.
Okay.
Because it's driven by what goes on inside somebody else's mind or head or experiences or whatever, right? And so until you get down to having a discussion about why do I see this behavior in you, and you really peel the onion back about what drives it, no one's ever sure exactly why, and it's all kind of make stuff up. So you have to have that conversation, but to start the conversation at the level you need to have it, there has to be kind of a shock, which is in my example, it was the shock of, "I don't trust you." And then multiple behaviors were given.
I think as somebody who, in working for you, you'd appreciate the directness. Where do you learn to manage that style? Was it the way that people managed you, or how do you pick that up? Was it something at Iowa State, or how does that develop over time?
I'm not exactly sure how it developed, but I know it's in me because there's at Cargill, you go through these 360 reviews, right, as you move up.
Right.
And there was a time in my life when she happened to be the HR manager of Animal Nutrition at the time, and a great friend of mine now, Dana Nelson. And I had this 360 review, and you get it back, and it's got all the glowing comments about you and all this kind of stuff. But in the back, it's got the areas for improvement. And I go right to the areas for improvement. I'm reading them down. I read this one, and it's like 4 sentences. In the margin, I wrote down 4 words to go with each one of those sentences, and it was overbearing, inflexible, explosive. And I can't recall the last one, but those were 3 of the 4 words I wrote, and the 4th one wasn't very good either.
Yeah, right.
It was, and
wow.
Yeah. And I went,
and where do you take that? What do you do with it? Yeah.
Man. But it as I later in my career, I went through another a Gallup it's a Gallup survey. It's and they do the 34 themes. Your kind of strengths is what they're called.
Okay.
So it's Gallup Strength Finders 2.0. And
okay,
you
yep.
take this and you do your strengths. Well, my strengths come out and they're competitive, command, strategic, significance, and activator.
Yeah.
Well, so what that means is I have opinion. It's really you're going to hear it because it's going to be really strong. You're going to hear it right now because of the activator. And it's really important, which is the significance. So I was like, okay, I got that. So I think it's more, inside of me. Now, how I got it, I'm not exactly sure. But I am a firm believer in the worst thing that can happen to someone is things go unsaid that need to be said.
Right.
So whether it's information I need to hear from my boss that you don't get told, or an employee who really needs to hear the news and no one ever tells them.
So you talk a little bit about the why, and would it be fair to say on the leadership team of people that supported you that you wanted to know, or you did find out the why of, why are you in your role? Why are you at Cargill? I mean, how far do you dig into the why of them having the position they have?
I'm going to say I don't know, but I spent a lot of time knowing them individually. So what makes them tick? Why do they think the way they do? Maybe not why do they have the position they have or
sure.
want the position they have,
Sure.
but what makes them tick? In this Strength Finders, so the themes, I became a big believer in, because when I saw my own, 10 years after I'd gotten this 360 feedback from an HR person, and I put them together, I said, absolutely. The reason she's describing me as inflexible and overbearing
right.
and is because I have command and I have activator and I have strategic and it goes together. And it also fit with, feedback that I'd had my whole career about, boy, you can come on really strong. You're kind of pushy, things like that. And it was, what I figured out was it was who I am, and what I had to moderate was the style. So go back to the behaviors. So what drives the behaviors I have? Somebody could say, well, what's driving your behaviors is you're just a jerk, right? Mm-hmm. Well, it wasn't. So now if people are seeing me that way, I have to go, well, I can't really change the behaviors. Well, I can change the behaviors, but I really can't change the reason for the behaviors, right? They're hardwired inside me. So what I have to do is I have to figure out, how do I change what they see me or how they see me react to these and do it a different way.
The style of delivering.
The style of delivering, yeah. So learn to ask a question instead of state your opinion, which is really hard for somebody with command.
Right.
Take the hill.
Right.
How do you think we should take the hill? And you have to learn it. Fortunately, along the way too, I had someone else, a third person, who was mentoring me, and she'd seen all this. And she said, okay, Todd, from now on, you have to ask 2 questions before you can make a statement. So if somebody comes into your office, they call you on the phone, you have to ask 2 questions. You don't know how hard that is.
Wow.
But you learn, and for the longest time, probably 3 or 4 years, I had a question mark on my bulletin board right by my phone. So when my phone rang, I picked it up, I could see the question mark. I went, oh yeah, I have to ask a question first.
And I suppose if someone worked for you, when you started asking questions, they're like, dang it. He knows the answer. He's got a path.
Yeah.
Or maybe they go, I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
We don't have to get there,
Finally, hopefully later in my career, it became one of my better traits, which was I learned along the way that if you surround yourself with great people, then let them do their job. And so if they brought something to you, typically if you ask the questions, you got a much better answer or outcome or action going forward than what you could have possibly come up with yourself. And I actually think that's true of most managers.
And so your job is to help them think through. They've got a hunch. Well, let's just think through that further.
Yeah. How would you do that? Mm-hmm. Why might you do it that way? And how else would you think about doing it? Just questions like that you can throw out and then make them deeply think about it.
Now that you're retired, do you miss that?
I miss the people. I miss the coaching. I miss the mentoring. Yeah, the colleagues I miss a lot. I don't miss hopping on a plane for Asia,
Right.
or Europe, something like that. I don't miss the travel, the wear and tear on the body, and the time zone changes and things like that. I don't miss the politics that go on in an organization, but I really miss the people.
And do those people who you've mentored still stay connected to you?
Yeah. There's a number of them that I text back and forth, or we talk on a regular basis. And the mentor I talked about earlier, Richard Frosch, and Richard and I are still stay connected. And he's been retired 13 years now, I think, maybe. Something like that.
Got it. Fantastic. Well, so let's chat a little bit about that. This first quarter of 2019, you retired.
Yeah.
And how's it been?
It's been great. It's been awesome. My wife would say, "Oh yeah, it's awesome. You get up in the morning and you go flying, and you come home and then you play golf."
Right. And flying a plane.
Flying a plane.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's something you had done when you were younger, and just it went away, and now you picked it up. Is that right?
Yeah. I became a private pilot when I was in college. I actually got my license in the fall of '81, and I graduated in the spring of '82. And I think I flew one time after I got my private pilot's license. I think I rented a plane once and went up, and life in college, it gets in the way, and the expense of renting airplanes and things like that. And but it was always something I loved to do. And so when I was formulating my retirement plans, part of the secret planning that was going on was okay, I got to get my medical up to date. I've got to find a instructor in Arizona when I get down there in a club where I can rent a plane, and I managed to do that all last spring. And I think it was last May 1st, end of April or early May of 2019, I got current, and so now I go up and fly on a regular basis. Well,
and so you were in your late 50s when you retired, and what was your first thought? I mean, I assume that there's a time where you either have to decide if there's an opportunity, I guess. Do I stay at my current role? Do I become a CEO of the organization? Or am I done? And what hits you to say, you know what, maybe it's time for me to be done?
That might be difficult for a lot of people. It wasn't for me. I had planned to retire when I was 55, and I started that planning almost right out of college. Cargill allowed us to start putting money away in a 401k, and I did the math going forward and thinking about how much I would need by the time I was 55. I had planned to retire at 55 and been planning that my entire life. The CEO at Cargill, when I was 54 and a half, asked me to join, at the time, the corporate leadership team, which became the executive team later.
Right.
And then shortly after, they asked me to join the board, and it was like, oh, great. I was planning to retire when I was 55. now if I do that, it's going to look really bad, for him and me if I take the job and then retire in 6 months. So I'm not going to do that.
Okay.
So that was when I made the decision I'm going to work longer than 55 when I decided to accept that position. But I told him at the time that I wouldn't be there when I was 60.
Okay.
So kind of gave him this window. The decision, of to go at when I did, which was when I was almost 59, just shy of 59, I think the timing was right. I had a great successor lined up. And, I'm a big believer that leaders need to have their successor in, there. And Brian was ready, and he was good, and he knew the job, and I knew he was going to do a great job. And
even though he'd tell you he wasn't ready.
Right. Even though he was probably scared, like, what am I getting myself into?
Right.
But it was time for me. My father passed away of a stroke at 62. Over my career, I've watched a lot of people who work right to the end. They retire, and within 6 months they're gone. First of all, I don't know whether that is inside of them, they give up, or whether it's they gave all their time to the company and then didn't have any time for them because their health ran out. If it was the latter, I wasn't going to let that happen. I wanted to have some good years of retirement. And so I have enough going on to keep my mind sharp, business-wise, mentally, and stay in the game that way. Just enough, and not enough to be a burden.
Got it. And you're not. I mean, you were a member of the board at Cargill. You don't have any desire currently to be a member of any other boards now that you're retired? I mean, is it right now just relax? Kinda?
Yeah. So, I just took on an advisory board position for an Israeli agricultural startup in 1st of December. But they had contacted me a year ago, and I said, I'm not going to do anything for 6 months because I want to see how this goes and what's going on. And so I told them in October that I'd come on board with them. So it's not going to be real demanding time wise, but it does keep me in the game, and it's a startup, which I really like. I think startups.
It's a different vibe, right?
It is. Well, and I mean, with the technology that's around today, disrupting mainline old businesses, I actually think it's really cool, but it's also important to understand how you apply some of this technology. So I like that. There's a fund that I invested in, a small kind of venture capital fund that I invested in Chicago, and I've been asked to sit on the advisory council of that. So that also keeps me kind of on that cutting edge of new stuff coming out.
Would you say, I just was thinking of this off the top of my head, since things seem to evolve and you had, these positions that you took that, maybe you didn't feel you were qualified for at the time or whatever, are you a goal setter?
No. I wouldn't say I'm a goal setter because and here's what I'll describe. I think goal setters start off with, this is what I want to achieve. And here are the 6 things I must do to achieve them. And those 6 things get broken down into, these are the things I need to do quarterly, and these get broke down into things I need to do daily, and there's a daily list on their desk.
Right.
That's not me.
Right.
That's not me. I would put myself not a goal setter, but this sounds conceited, so I hate saying it, but a visionary. And I don't mean that from like, some really cool guy with special talents.
Right.
I see where an organization needs to go. I think about, this is where we ought to be. And then I think about, so who are the people that need to be part of this team to help us get there? Because the world's changing, so you got to have different talents around you. And then bring those people into the team and share your vision with them. This is where I think we ought to go. This is, what do you think? How do you think we could get there? And then kind of set them on the path of creating what the future will become. So if you call that goal setting, yeah, but I'm not in the check the box, meet your annual objective type goal setting guy.
Right. And so your evolution probably at Cargill then was probably a manager at some point in time recognizing your ability to create the vision.
I would guess so. As I think about the people that, I brought onto my team and then mentored and eventually sponsored into higher positions, that's what I see in them, is that ability to take a vision and turn it into reality through, their planning and their hard work and the strategy they put together and things like that. Those are the people that I lift up, or I have tried to lift up over my career. So I'm guessing somewhere along the way, that's probably what happened.
Here's my last thought then. What's your vision now into retirement? What's the 20 or 5 year or 2 month vision that you've got now?
Well, I want to shoot my age someday.
A golf. There we go.
And I'm only 59, so it's really hard right now when I'm an 8 handicapper.
Right.
So I've got to live a long time.
Yeah, you got to live a long time.
I've got to live a long time to do
plan.
it. Yeah.
All right. That's great. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. Thanks.
I really appreciate it, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for coming in. This was fantastic.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Todd Hall. retired executive VP at the Cargill Corporation. If you'd like to catch up with him, you'll probably find him enjoying his early retirement on the golf course or flying a plane. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, wealth advisor and founding partner of Moxie Wealth Management. You can learn more about me and my firm at moxiewealthmanagement.com. That's MOXIE wealthmanagement.com. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.